Doug, I was surprised to learn that this new millennium you stood as SCAR candidate for Mayor of London.
I did indeed,
How
yeah.
did that come about?
Well, I'm not really a political person, but what really became obvious to me was there was a real gap in the market for anybody that was quite well known and that would really stand up for the average person in London. So I just decided to take it on as a venture and see how I went with it. Well, I was so surprised how many people suddenly got behind me and how many taxis would stop in the street and go on, Buster, we're behind you.
What was your manifesto?
Well, there was plenty of in the manifesto. I mean, one of the things that I really thought was quite important was improving the transport of London and the routes into London and even making certain main routes, you know, like the Roman roads that actually divide London up, making them one ways so that you could get onto those and get into London and get out of London quite quickly. Whereas they've got it in such a way at the moment, whereas everybody will join the traffic flow and cause a jam. Plus I thought that, you know, things like I was really up for women having free tampons and things like that, which nobody had ever really discussed before. And if you think of the indignity women have to go through each month, that it just became an obvious thing, and it was what women were saying to me more than me trying to pick up good ideas off of, you know, what would win elections. I just was listening to what the people were saying. I suppose, you know, I crossed a lot of borders when I did it, and so, you know, people liked what I was up to.
And how far did your campaign go?
It went all the way, really. It went to the point where there was Ken had actually come down and said, I've read all your manifestations and
I'm worried.
And I think that you've got some really good ideas and I would like to adopt a few of the things.
All right.
And then it was so amazing when I started seeing the Labour theories on life that were going down the same road as me. I just thought, wow, this is a bit unusual. But I was just taken with people's attitude that really got me. But I knew that I'm not a politician and I never want to be a politician. And so at some point I had to pull out, and it was working out when to do it. But of course they sort of gave me the chance when they said that you know, all candidates must pay X amount of money. And at that point I just said, well, I'm going to wish Ken the best because I think that he's the best candidate standing. And of course he's now gone into his second term.
Yeah, I bet he was quite relieved.
I think he was a bit shocked with what was going on, yeah.
Right.
I think he was quite thankful that I'd gone behind and backed him as well. I think
Right.
that, yeah.
And another thing about this new millennium was that you re-recorded Bad Manners singles. How did that project come about?
Well, basically the songs that were owned by Bad Manners got taken into Magnet Records, and of course they were then bought by Warner Brothers, old Bugs Bunny himself, and they didn't want ever to let us use them, and we thought it was crazy because everybody else had had their CDs out and the best ofs had come out and gone, and so we decided, well, let's put it together ourselves and we'll re-record them all, and we'll re-record them as good as we possibly could so that they sound exactly the same as the originals. And yeah, I think that we made a good job of that. Certainly it was a good enough job for Warner Brothers to actually sit up and take notice and then release the best of, which was very strange that they would do such a thing
Just by
after.
coincidence.
Yeah, just by coincidence. But you know, we've had some tough sort of decisions with things like that because they still have never released the first 3 albums on DVD or on CD, sorry. So I think that that's a project that should definitely have happened a long time ago, and people crying out from worldwide, you know, because at the time they sold very well, and you can still buy them on eBay quite willingly. You know, any of the free albums that are desperate for by everybody.
Which of those first 3 were your favourite?
I suppose you know the first making of the album was probably the first album, which was Scar and B. That was an exciting time, I suppose. Everything was changing really rapidly for us. I mean, I really enjoyed the process of recording, so all albums were just equally as good for me. But the actual challenge of being put into a studio and to come up with a commercial album was quite exciting. And you know, as young kids that thought we had no chance at all about anything commercial, it was a bit of a gamble on the record company's side. And we had to really prove our point by coming up with commerciality and songs that would be accepted by the masses.
And how did Magnet spot you?
Well, our popularity had grown in the London clubs. We sort of struggled from school into having the best time we possibly could at the weekends and all meeting up and thereabouts playing gigs to anyone who'd come along and listen to us. And we created quite a strange crowd because of the music style that we was playing. And we knew that we was going to go well when we went into, like, you know, the battle of the bands, and we came last. And all these really traditional bands playing really boring music all won, and we was, like, you know, really at the bottom of the pile. Yet the crowd, no doubt in anybody's mind who won in the crowd, we certainly won. So we had a point to prove at that point, and I suppose our musical ability wasn't very good, but our enthusiasm was 10 times more enthusiastic than anybody.
Now, if we can go right back to Woodbury Downs,
yes, where it all started.
Tell us about that chaotic scene where there were 35 musicians at some rehearsals, and,
yeah,
and it was all under your leadership, was it? Yeah.
Well, not being the best of musicians at the time, any of us, someone had to take the bull by the horns, and so I did. And yes, it was quite interesting, the fact that we'd have all these people that had come in and were sort of playing with us, but we had a nucleus. We knew who we really was in the band, and we was up to about 10 people that actually were in the band. And then there was all these other musicians surrounding us that we used as depths. And we've always kept that. It's sort of like a traditional thing for us to have 30 musicians at one time all playing and saying that they're in Bad Manners, yet only 8 or 9 would be on stage at any one given time.
But the thing about the ska revival, the two-tone revival that sort of came about, started really gathering momentum in the late 70s. This was, when you started, was at 76, so you actually were ahead of that. Now then, with all the influence, you were into Uriah Heep, Chris Kane was into Bill Haley, Alan was into all kinds of music.
I wasn't into Uriah Heep really. I was more into Bonzo Dog Doodah band.
Right,
no, big difference. Yeah.
Oh, well, that was David on your website said that
Uriah Heep.
Yeah. Yes.
No, I wasn't into Uriah.
Right,
I mean, I'd listened to them, yeah, but it wasn't really my sort of style. No.
Right.
I was more into Bonzo Dog. That was more me.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was all various styles of music actually all coming together, and we carried it under the banner which we realised was the style of music that we all really liked, which we all really liked, early ska music. So that was the forerunner of our style, and followed by the various different injections of music that all the band liked.
Do you remember the Desmond Dekker mid-60s sort of boom? You know,
of course I do, yeah. I loved it as a child. I grew up in a predominantly black area of Stoke Newington, which was great because, you know, I'd got the best of both worlds regarding music.
Right.
But yes, certainly as a child, the music that sort of was mine, even though it wasn't, but it was in my heart, it was ska and reggae.
Not the Beatles or anything?
Yes, that was also there, but I mean, that was my sister's music, and the Stones was my brother's music, and
right.
you know, so to me, the music that all my friends, when we go to a party, they would play early ska, so that would be the music for me. Yes, I suppose you could put me into the bracket of people like Mark Boland and things like that, you know, and the David Bowie, but I was more into the ska than I was into that style of music.
Can you remember the first ska record that you really went for?
Of course, My Girl Lollipop was My Boy Lollipop, sorry, was the one that really took me. And of course, it was probably the biggest charting hit at the time of ska stroke reggae.
Right.
But thereafter that, you know, I just fell in love with all styles of it: the rocksteady, the reggae, the skinhead reggae, the rude boys, the whole thing just really grabbed me. And it was also surrounding the time of all the mod stuff that was going on. So, and I was just a young kid, but very much into the music.
What did you reckon to punk?
Well, punk was sort of my era. And so I come from, and Bad Manners was formed in 1976 when punk actually did start to come about. Pre-punk though, I would say, you know, the bands that we went and saw was people like Ian Dury and Elvis Costello and Southside Johnny and bands that were very much orientated by the pub and things like Dr. Feelgood. And
bluesy,
so,
R&B.
it was R&B. So that's why our first album was called Ska-R&B, which was like, you know, a mixture of the ska and the R&B. We really sort of relied on our live thing, you know, and I just thought music was live. And when punk came about, it was so live and so there and then. And once it actually left London, I do think that it really did suffer. You know, that's not, I don't know, it's a bit discriminating against everybody else that was into punk at the time, but for me it was a real London thing. And I've had this argument a million times with people saying, oh no, it started in New York, it was, you know, the New York Dolls. But for me, it really was, you know, it was Johnny and the boys all getting up there and doing it.
And before you were Bad Manners back in the mid-70s, you started out as the backstage boogies.
Yeah.
And playing at places like Stonehenge for hippies.
Yeah,
so
that's
it was
right.
a pretty wide berth, that.
Yes, I mean, well, we started as the Backstreet Boogies. That was what we called ourselves on the way to Stonehenge. We didn't think what we would call ourselves. And my mum had packed me this huge 2 loaves of cheese and pickled sandwiches, and the first song we ever did together like that was the Cheese and Pickle Blues, which was me trying to sing whilst eating a loaf of cheese and pickle sandwiches, which was quite, you know, disgusting because it was all flying out everywhere and going all over the place.
Well, in the history it says you spat it out over the audience. Now, is that fair?
I would say that you would say that I was really sort of realised that at that point that the hippies were responding to me spitting cheese and pickle all over them. I suppose so. But I was just so amazed that there were people actually walking around naked, and you know, the real thing that shocked me was the fact I had this schoolgirl crush on a girl that was actually at the festival, and she then went into the river naked, and I actually saw her naked, and I just was so shocked to see this girl that I went to school with that I had a crush on, and there she was, like in this river naked. You know, at the time it was a real big thing for me, so I really had to perform the next day on stage, twice as big as anybody else was there. We went on at 12 o'clock in the day, and you know, most good hippies by then were fast asleep, but we got them all up, and we went down a storm, playing things like Allman Brothers songs and things like that.
Right. So how about Sloop Solo and
Sloop Solo and the Sheep Starchers? Well, that was
a great name.
It was a great name, and to deal with our masturbationary problems at the time. Certainly, we starched a lot of sheets in them days, and of course, we started playing the pubs and clubs, and that was because we had nothing else to do really, and we wanted to leave school as good friends and still have connections and also get free drink. Nothing better. And of course, that's what we did. We stuck together for that reason. And then record companies started getting very interested in us and started turning up on the doorstep. But by then, we had bouncers and door people that we'd encourage. They would get the yellow and black tape, which is on any roadside thing, and we'd nick like loads of it. And then we'd stand at the door, and as the people would walk through the door, we would just tape them up in any position that they wanted. Some people wanted it across their chest, some people wanted it around their legs, and of course all these record company people, we didn't know they were looking at us, and they walked through the door, and as soon as they walked through the door, they'd never experienced like a huge skinhead grabbing hold of them and then strapping them up with all this yellow and black tape, saying you're now a Bad Manners fan. So that went down very well with the record companies, you know, how straight that they were at them days. And they were very straight people. You know, they all talk about how outrageous they were. To me, they were the most boring bunch of people I'd ever met in my life. But, you know, I had to keep face with them. amazing when we first got invited to Magnet Records, which we was just about to sign the deal, and they left us in a room for an hour, which was a really silly thing, because first of all we went through his bar and cleared that out straight away, and then once we was all very drunk, we swallowed all these heart pills and then started taking down all the gold and silver discs that were on the walls and run away with them. So we'd stolen half of his office before we'd even signed on the dotted line, and then of course he came in with these contracts ready for us to sign. Said, "Where's my heart pills?" Went absolutely apeshit at us.
And around that time, before then, Doug, you were also thinking in terms of being an actor. When did you decide to go one way?
Yeah, I mean, while I was at school, I mean, my whole thing was that I was about to leave school and I wanted to be an actor and a photographer. But acting was my first love. But as I hadn't had no professional training, I didn't quite know what to do. I actually went to Anna Shear's youth development or whatever it was at the time, and I had a choice of the actual fee to get in to do this. It was on a Tuesday. They did like an open evening to see if people were good enough, and the actual fee was 12.5p, and I remember it really well, 12.5p, of which I had 12.5p, but knew that Savoy and chips also cost 12.5p. So I had the choice of being an actor or being a fat bastard, and I went for being a fat bastard.
Right. Sought Anna Shear.
So Anna Shear, and I've met her since and told her the story, and she went, "You should have just come in. With talent like you, we wanted it." So yeah, I mean, I've often thought that I really enjoy acting, but I realised that, you know, and I've done films and I've done theatre work, and without a doubt, there's no comparison to me. I really enjoy the atmosphere and to work live when the theatre is really where I'm at. I'm just so comfortable with audiences and not so comfortable with cameras and lighting, although I can do an interview all right.
And you mentioned about Bonzo Dog and Bruce Stansall being kind of a big mentor, influence.
Yeah, lots of people really. Ian Dury as well. Yeah.
Right. When did
Chuck Berry? I could go on forever on them. Otis Redding. Oh, these people used to make me cry. I used to sit at home and just love the music that was coming out from the speakers. Yes.
But when did Buster Bloodvessel start
Appear.
to form? The Magical Mystery Tour was the inspiration.
Well, that's right. I mean, not many people realise that the name actually comes from a character in the Magical Mystery Tour, and I didn't realise it till many years of carrying the name around. But it was, in fact, on the first performance at Stonehenge was when the character Buster Bloodvessel was formed, and then I played with some teachers. They asked me to get up and do a few songs with them, and it was like a school assembly, and they really did, like, you know, they fell for everything that I was doing, and they thought that this is a wonderful thing. So I just had this character, and we didn't know what to call, what or who to call it. But the bass player at the time, he was very good with names, and he just said, "You should be called Buster Bloodvessel." And as soon as he said it, I just went, that's me for the rest of my life. And yes, the character Buster, and of course then after having the name, it really did point me in a direction of a character that was just about to bust a blood vessel on stage, or burst a blood vessel on stage, should I say.
Yeah.
And so my performances have always been 110%. You know, you can feel the veins coming out of my neck, you can feel the blood bursting to come out and meet the rest of the world.
Yeah. And when food was there right from the start, was it the food?
Food's always been there, yeah.
Food to you have been a foodie since the year.
Yeah, I suppose I had this thing where I just used to encourage my stomach to eat more than anybody else, and I used to think that it was a big and very clever thing. You know, if anybody started the obese swing in this country, I would like to put my hand up and say it was definitely me. Yeah, I used to, for pleasure, eat 2 or 3 kebabs and insert 2 or 3 kebabs into my mouth at one go, and you know, and so everybody would be laughing and it'd all be a great joke, but really I didn't realise the damage I was doing myself. And of course I've also been a very healthy eater and also a very unhealthy eater, and I like the both, and I like periods of being an unhealthy eater, and I like eating really good foods that other people go, I wouldn't think you're that sort of person. but that's the way I am.
Do you not hold the record for the largest number of Big Macs consumed in one session?
Well, it's questionable. I mean, it was all down to a bet which I had with a person at the record company that I could eat 30 Big Macs. And the band went behind me and they said, oh, he'll definitely do it. And we went down to the McDonald's thing and I said, well, it will be over a course of a day. So it wasn't a hard thing for me really at the time. So I consumed the first 10, no problem. And then slowly went through, just going through slowly over a course of a couple of hours the next. And then they got somebody down to take some photographs and do some, to witness me doing this. And I got up to 29 and I was instantly sick. I threw up all over the table and of course lost the bet totally, but I got to 29 and by then I've been told on many an occasion that nobody else has ever eaten as many as that. But I find them quite easy to eat because they sort of crunch down really easy. Some people say that they're really filling. I've never found them filling at all.
And you mentioned about cheese and pickle blues,
Yeah.
and that was, your mum's sandwiches up on stage,
Yeah.
and that. Was that the start of the idea where food would become a theatrical thing with bad manners? Because I
Yes,
gather you also screwed up pork pies in pint glasses.
Well, that was a Tiswas thing. That was when I appeared on Tiswas. They said to me, we've heard you like pickled onions. And I said, well, it's a bit more than that. If you'd like me to show you at 7 o'clock in the morning how I eat pickled onions, I'd be pleased to. And they went, oh, perfectly, yeah, go ahead. So I unscrewed the lid and got this pork pie out and crushed the pork pie up and pushed it into the pickled onions and then screwed the lid back on and then shook the jar, making it almost like a milkshake pickled onion pork pie drink. And then started to drink this at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the crowd at the time just thought it was wonderful, and the reaction off of the great British public was quite alarming, because wherever I went, people would buy me jars of pickled onions and pork pies. And it was a whole thing that I designed when I was playing rugby, because I used to play tight head prop, so the person next to me was the hooker and his head would be there, and they'd go, ball coming in, and I'd have already eaten all this jar of pickled onions and pickled onions, and I'd just breathe straight on him, ball coming in, ah! And I'd just shout with the person throwing it in, and he'd get a face full of pickled onions and pork pies as well as the smell, and then I moved it up to garlic and various other things, and it always worked because it put them off and we'd always win the scrum.
Gastric terrorism.
That's right, gastric terrorism.
Now, the Top of the Pops experience.
Yeah.
Oh, Tiswas, you mentioned you prefer people as an audience to cameras.
Yes.
But you had lots of memorable camera.
Yeah, no, I did
moments.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, once they actually let us run amok, which they did on Top of the Pops, they fell in love with us after our first performance. Although it was later in the day, they actually banned us and was never to go on there again because I painted my head red, which was a bit strange. But I really sort of excelled, I suppose, and so did the band, because they allowed us to go out and buy clothes and dress up and be silly. I suppose people will always remember things like me dressing up as Henry VIII and singing to a blow-up doll, which was Lorraine. And I think that the video or the filming of that was more memorable than the actual song. You know, people still say to me, what was that song you did where you dressed up? They can never remember the song, they can always remember the occasion though. But also, the thing which has always amazed me is when I come up with the idea to do the can-can. As soon as I came up with it, the idea was already in my head what I was going to do on Top of the Pops. Dressed in a can-can dress with Dr. Martin boots, I knew that it had to go down extremely well. And of course I told the rest of the band, and they went, that's a rubbish idea, that'll never work. And I told various other people, and they just all said, oh, terrible idea, never going to work. And I knew the whole way through, and the only person that was really behind me at the time was Roger, who was our producer, and he said, yeah, that's a great idea, don't worry what everyone else is saying, it's going to work. And of course, I think that was our biggest selling single.
And the only Can Can was kept from the top of the charts by Ghost Town.
Ghost Town and,
Now, looking
and
at
Gloria Gaynor or somebody.
Right, but taking Ghost Town
Yeah.
and Can Can,
Oh,
both
totally
you know, the
streets apart.
two-tone movement.
Yes, totally
So-
two-tone, yeah.
You were the totally comic side of it. Two-tone, a lot of it was
Yeah.
to do with those times, you know, the
Yeah.
riots of the early
Yeah.
80s and
The
Thatcherism.
depression of the Thatcher, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was this a deliberate thing by you that you said what the people need
We never
is
was
comedy?
political. We never was political. We never wanted anything to do with politics at all. A coincidence in timing, really. But I know that, you know, we sold more singles than anybody that year on the Can Can, which was amazing because we all know that the song Ghost Town was such a big hit. It was #1, and it was such a, you know, well received song, but it didn't sell nowhere near as much as we sold, which is amazing. But you know, obviously the ones that we sold didn't sell in chart shops at the time, or something. I don't know quite how it went. But I think that people will always remember the two songs in the same sort of era, yes, and being the complete opposites. And people were saying, "Lord, what are you selling out for your music?" But we always, from the word go, have never said that we wanted anything to do with politics or being part of any political movement or anything like that. We loved the idea that we were fun, and our music came across as fun, and I think that in the depressing time that it was, that we was a great release.
Mm-hmm. So some of the bands in the two-tone movement, do you think they were overly political?
I don't think that they were overly political. I think that they were writing music what they felt was from the times. So I think that, you know, you could think of lots of other bands and lots of other styles of bands that were playing music and writing music that were definitely over political. But I don't think that the two-tone era was particularly over political.
And there's all in the early 80s. You've got the Top of the Pops experiences, and it's a wild success. Ska and B is doing great, and you're having great times.
Yeah.
And suddenly, there's a reality check in Ireland.
Yeah.
When Alan.
Well, I mean,
player.
I think that we was our height, and you know, the problem with being at our height is that there's always somebody that really suffers, and I think that Alan actually was the one who suffered out of all of us because he started to have a nervous breakdown, which was a real shame because he was probably the most funniest man, and really he should have had his own show. He was that funny, and he would have been a huge hit if he would have had his own show.
Winston Bazoomis.
Winston Bazoomis, yeah. Yes.
Where did that come from?
Well, after the Buster Bloodvessel name sort of came about, then they decided that we all needed a name, and he just decided to be called Winston Bazoomis for whatever reason none of us can ever say, and it was one of his characters, but certainly everyone knew him as Siag, and he was always Siag.
But when, alas, he did fall ill,
yes.
Did that serve as a kind of warning to the rest of you that perhaps indulgence?
It took away from all of us, yeah. It took away that maybe we was going a bit too crazy, and that maybe we should look at what we're up to. But I mean, it didn't stop us. Even when Alan actually was committed into hospital, we had so many tours of the world going on that we just had to carry on and keep the Bad Manners flag flying. And he did actually return, but never returned like he was. So.
And he was replaced by Jerry Tremaine, who is playing this evening.
Jerry Tremaine is playing this evening, yes indeed, yeah. Jerry came in at a time when we needed a harmonica, and he was just at the gig, and he got up and started playing, and he knew the lines. Obviously he didn't play the lines exactly right, but everything seemed to be good on his behalf, and yes, and it's amazing that he went off and he's done his thing, and now he's come back to do a show with us tonight.
Right. And after forging ahead, and just going ahead very quickly, there was the American Portrait Records experience. Now, can you tell us a bit about it? Because it sounds
we
like
got out of
terrible hype.
Yeah, we got out of Magnet, and it was a great thing for us to get out of Magnet. And of course, then we got the biggest record company in the world at the time, which was CBS Portrait. And we thought, well, that's interesting. The biggest record company in the world wants us, but you know, we was like partnered with Michael Jackson and you know, people that we just couldn't imagine ourselves being mixed with, and
they were chucking money at you.
And they were throwing money left, right, and centre at us. But little did we know that the whole reason why they were doing that was because they'd earned so much money out of all their other artists that they wanted to lose money on somebody. So they threw money at us, hoping that we was going to come up with a load of old rubbish. And well, they forced us down this trail where we had like, you know, big American producers come to town and tried to show us how to do the whole thing, and we had big arguments, and well, it didn't really go too well. And then we did a tour of America, which was quite a depressing tour of America. The actual fans and everybody was great, but we knew the record company wasn't behind us, even though they'd said to us that they were. And
why was that?
Again, like, I fear that they were using us as some sort of tax loss, or
right.
You know, because
this was the Mental Notes album.
Yeah, we actually released it at a certain date in America, and we started the tour, and we toured the States. And by the time we got to the LA side, and was told to, you know, connect up with our West Coast record company, actually phoned up the main guy who I was given the name to, who was looking after Bad Manners, and he didn't have a clue who he was. And so we arranged a meeting with him, and I went and sat on his desk and made sure that he knew who I was by the time I left the building. What was really sad on that tour is that we worked ourselves stupid for them, not realising that half of the Americans, the side of the LA side of America, didn't even know that the album was put out. They hadn't even released it on the west side. Yet it was a big thing on the east side.
And they wouldn't release it in Europe and England for a while.
And well, that was down to us saying, right, well, if you're not going to do that, then you're not really taking us seriously, and we're not certainly going to take you seriously. So we brought the solicitors in. Something I really didn't want to do, but it got to that sort of stage where we had no choice. Sad at that point. Also, on that tour of America, we actually had a conga player who was called Jimmy Scott, who actually wrote the song "Oh Bloody, oh Blada, Life Goes On, Brah," which is in fact African. It has nothing to do with Liverpool. He died. And he died of pneumonia on the tour, and it was probably the most horrific thing that ever happened to Bad Manners at the time. They actually put him into customs and thought he was some sort of drug dealer, and kept him there stripped naked while he had pneumonia, and told him that he had pneumonia on many occasions, and so did we, and so did all the people that were with us, and they kept him in there for an hour and a half stripped naked, and he came out of the customs, went home, and was rushed to hospital and died. Very sad.
Stephen Biko story.
Yeah, very, very sad, and yeah, well, what can you say when such a thing happens? So immediately we informed the record company that we had nothing more to do with them. I actually flew to America to see the guy who actually took us on, and again I went and sat on his desk until he actually produced the contract, and thereon I just ripped the contract into shreds and said, you haven't got a contract anymore. I don't care what you want to do legally, but we're not doing nothing else for you.
Right.
And so we was out of that contract, but legally had to abide by it for at least a couple more years.
And as a result also, didn't you have a huge VAT bill? Suddenly you were massively financially in trouble.
Yeah, we had probably one of the biggest VAT bills, and all down to our record company saying that they gave us the VAT money and didn't.
Right.
But we actually had to go and prove that, which took about 5 years, of which we had this hanging over our heads that we'd be made bankrupt at any point throughout this 5 years. And very depressing. But can I say, in all this depression and all this bad times, Bad Manners carried on flying the flag. And we toured every country, and every country said what a absolute fun time that they'd had with every gig that we did. Right. And we were still ramming them in, and people were walking away with the biggest smiles on their faces saying that this is the best band they'd ever seen. So we still carried the flag, even though we had some very tough times behind the scenes.
And harmonica players wise, there was Stevie Smith
Well, the
For
brand
what?
started to change at that point. We started to move into me just running the whole thing and various musicians coming and going.
Busters All Stars.
It was Busters All Stars was what made us go on to the other thing of the continuing Bad Manners. But yes, I had to take a break and pick up young musicians, people that were enthusiastic, and Busters All Stars is what did that. Yeah.
Right. If we can sort of jump forward now to these politically correct times
Yeah.
when McDonald's Big Macs are
Yeah.
twice as healthy as they've ever
Yeah.
been, and all that stuff. Quite recently, you've had some health problems that you're happily over
Yeah.
now. Can you tell us about how you've survived and how it's changed you, perhaps? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that I was very much to do with the start of this obese Britain, and I've got this great quote from Hilary Jones, the GM TV doctor, saying that, you know, it's people like Buster that will make this country much fatter than it actually is. And of course, I started Fatty Towers, which was an alternative to the health farms that were going on, and really I encourage people to get as fat as possible. At my
With recipes like lard arse pudding.
though we had cow pie, we had the biggest breakfast in Britain, and of course I had to sit there and eat these with the people that they brought down, but there was also reasonable meals on there as well. There wasn't just the obese ones. But of course that has all changed now. I've had an operation and I'm now living the more healthier life and encouraging people to be a bit more healthier, because knowing, you know, carrying the weight around that I've carried around for so many years and bouncing about on stage with it, I don't know how I've done it really, and the strength that it's taken me to do it. But in the last 2 years I've really sort of suffered with a lot of bad health, and it's all down to the bigness of me, yet I've still been a very healthy person. I carried a hernia for 4 years, which has just grown, and the doctor, when I found a doctor that could do it, they actually said to me, this is the biggest hernia that they'd ever seen. Similar as I just had 2/3 of my stomach removed. I think that the doctor's quote was that he'd never actually seen a longer stomach. And I said, well, I wondered how I got all those pickled onions and pork pies and doner kebabs and various other things that you're not supposed to eat down my neck. But I always used to be able to do it, and maybe I was a bit silly in doing what I did, but I certainly enjoyed every minute of every ounce of every food that I ever ate.
Buster,
Yes.
thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.